I think we have a tendency sometimes to almost take for granted or think it's normal that so many young people end up in our criminal justice system. It's not normal.
Talk to those who know Republican, Democrat makes no difference. There is perhaps no more dysfunctional and poorly run segment of the American correctional system than our prisons. From prisons to this day run like slave labor camps, to the influx of drugs, sexual abuse, and torture that goes on behind those walls every day on both sides of the bars and the doors, to the lax manner in which we far too often slam anybody and everybody into cells without a second thought for what could be rehabilitation. We're not talking about going easy on the hardcore criminals here. That's not the point. We're talking about serious and thoughtful prison reform that will actually punish the guilty and not do the unthinkable, such as putting kids younger than teenagers into solitary confinement. Let's get to it. Our guest is former Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives, now Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at Prison Fellowship, the nation's largest outreach to prisoners and former prisoners. Welcome, Craig DeRoche, to the Hardline. Craig, thanks so much for being here. We meet now today after President Obama banned the practice of holding juveniles in solitary confinement at federal prisons, saying it could lead to, quote unquote, devastating, lasting psychological consequences. My first question is, Craig, did we have to get to this point to know that? That seems like common sense.
You know, it is funny to hear President Obama making such a socially conservative political stance, but you're right. It's amazing that it got to that point, to state the obvious, that how you treat juveniles that break the law will affect how those people behave as they grow into adulthood. And we've got to get it right. We've been locking people up. We haven't been making the situation better. We've been making it worse, which creates new victims, which makes us less safe. And we know that as social conservatives. We know that locking up another human being, that's appropriate, and it should be used in certain circumstances. But as you went with the lead in here, the government has done that without regard, you know, in too many instances, to the value of human life. Without regard to the checks and balances and how you hold somebody properly accountable for what they've done wrong. And in the case of the juveniles, what we want them to be when they grow up. Do we want to make them a better criminal, or do we want them to learn their lessons, pay back their debt?
Great point. Let me stop you there if I can, Craig, because I want to make sure we get a few things in here. Let's make it very clear right here at the front. We are not talking about the violent criminal offender being given a break. We're not talking about giving them their slippers at night. We're not talking about let them run the prisons. We are talking here about kids. Now, but let's also say there are kids who commit violent crimes. We know that. But if we're talking about 12, 13, 14, 16-year-olds, isn't there don't we have to, at least as human beings, give them a chance to rehabilitate, which comes down to the second part of your statement? Where's the rehabilitation anymore? It's not even there in prisons.
Right. We've let our government and institution, we send people to school, we want them to be smarter. We send them to the hospital, we want them to be healthier. For some reason, we've accepted that when you send them to prison, they'll become, in many cases, more likely to commit a crime. And you're absolutely right. There is nothing that the president or any of the conservatives involved in this policy discussion are talking about the people that are a risk to our communities. That's what prison is for. We're talking about that prison is being overused, particularly with juveniles. And when they're incarcerated and they have behavioral issues, rather than doing the hard work of correcting that behavior, we're making it worse by locking them in a cell by themselves and then releasing them back into the community, which just exacerbates the risk.
So, Craig, how do we then get to the point, knowing full well that there have to be people who are put behind bars, there are people who must stay there, there are some who must be punished, and making sure that we are not giving a pass to those, because you know that's going to happen. People will say, what you're talking about, Ed and Craig, is giving certain people a pass. So how do we then at least start reforming the system so we're not giving them a pass and still punishing the bad guys?
Well, we issued a report today called the Charles Colson Task Force, and nobody would ever call Chuck Colson soft on crime or liberal, certainly. And that was named by Congress after Chuck Colson. It was issued today, and it recommends 6 very specific recommendations. I won't go through all of them, but I encourage your viewers to check that out, because it says you got to determine who's going to go there in the first place. Prison should be used for the people that are the risk to the community. The people that owe us a debt that want to pay it back, make them pay it back. It's about accountability. And when you have someone's attention in prison, goodness gracious, use that money and that investment to move them away from crime. That it makes specific recommendations about how you actually do that by holding people accountable in the criminal justice system. So when they leave the system, they will not commit another crime. Very common sense. The conservatives, social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, libertarians, as well as, yes, people like the president, liberals and progressives are rallying behind it because it's the right thing to do. It's in line with our values and our principles as Americans.
Say that again, Craig. I only got 30 seconds left, but I want people to understand. We're not talking here about something that's liberal, that's left-wing. We're talking about something that fits within good, solid, conservative values, yes?
You can find this in the playbook of the most conservative fiscal leaders. You can find it in Scripture. And yes, there are progressives and liberals that support it, but it's based on their values aligning with conservative values. It's not a compromise. That's what makes it different. That's what makes it viable this year. Is it's a values-based reform that conservatives can rally behind.
It is something that needs to be started here. It needs to be continued because we need to at least start thinking about when these people get out of prison and not allowing them to continue to be career criminals. I want to remind everybody, go to prisonfellowship.org and learn more about the work that Craig DeRoche and his people are doing. Craig, thank you so much for being here. I hope we get a chance to talk again. Now let's ask you, let us know what you think about this, keeping in mind that this is within conservative values here and knowing full well that something's got to be done instead of just throwing people into a hole somewhere and tossing away the key. Let us know what you think. Stay with us. The fastest 60 minutes of news, The Hardline, continues.